Hey everybody, welcome back. So for this video, I've put together a very simple version of GPT-2, and it basically uses Transformers library, Torch, tkinter, Spacey, Wikipedia, JSON, and a handful of other libraries. For the installation of this, you can go to my GitHub link and clone the repository. And then to run the project, you can open up the project in your IDE. I use Microsoft Visual Studio, run the main Python file, and then basically you just interact with the chatbot. So starting from the top, we're going to be importing our libraries. Then we're going to load the English language model from Spacey. And then we have a custom dataset class definition. We're going to be defining the custom dataset, my dataset, that pre-processes the text for training the GPT-2 model. Then we're going to load the training data, and this checks if there's a training data file that exists, and if so, it loads the data set, and if not, it moves on so it doesn't crash. And then we have a data collator definition. This defines a data collator for language modeling, and this helps in batching and preparing the data for training. Then we have a model fine-tuning setup, and this sets up the fine-tuning parameters for GPT-2 model using the training arguments, and then the GPT-2 model and tokenizer loading. This loads the pre-training GPT-2 model and tokenizer. Then we have trainer initialization, and this also has to do with the fine-tuning of the GPT-2 model. And then we have code for the tkinter GUI setup. And there's text processing functions. And this defines the functions for processing user input, saves the conversation history, and loads the conversation history. And then we actually have the user input submission. So this handles the user input submission, processes it using Spacey, and then it generates a response in the GPT-2 model and displays that response within the GUI. And the conversation history management loads and displays the conversation history in the chat window. And then we have our main loop that starts the tkinter main event loop to run the GUI. So let's run the program and take a look at what we see in the GUI. So as you can see in the GUI, when it pops up, it shows some of the history of what I had written before, as I was testing it. And so let's type in a question such as, what is hydrogen? And because there's a question mark, it actually goes to Wikipedia and pulls up a summary of hydrogen peroxide. So there's a few different issues that happen when typing in a question like this. So there's ambiguity, there's limited scope, and disambiguation. And this has to do with the Wikipedia library not giving the right answer. So let's look at each one of these issues. So ambiguity means the question or topic that I've entered it might be ambiguous, leading to multiple possible meanings or interpretations. So Wikipedia might not be able to provide the definitive answer in these such cases. Next, we look at limited scope, meaning the Wikipedia articles have a specific scope and may not cover all of the possible topics or subtopics comprehensively. If the information you're looking for is not within the scope of the article, Wikipedia might not give you the relevant information. And then third, the disambiguation. Wikipedia may present a disambiguous page if the topic has multiple meanings or interpretations. In this case, you would need to select the correct interpretation to get the relevant information. A fourth potential issue is the page just isn't found, but in this case, it was found. It found something, but it wasn't exactly what we were looking for. It's not the end of the world, but it is something that needs to be ironed out. And instead of doing a question, let's try doing a statement. Let's say, tell me a story about a wizard and a hobbit. And in this case, it says, I'm not sure what the story is about, but I'm sure it's about a wizard and a hobbit. So there's a few things that are happening here. So we have, it gives a very short generative text response, which is good and what we're looking for, although we'd like to have a longer story than this. And secondly, we've got a repetitive answer where it says the same thing 3 times. There's a few reasons for this. So first, let's look at training data. If the model was trained on a data set that contained short answers or repetitive patterns, it may learn to generate similar responses. Next, context. The model's responses are influenced by the context of the conversation. So if the context is limited or ambiguous, the model may generate shorter, less informative answers. Third, we have a sampling strategy. The way that you sample from the model can affect the length and diversity of the responses. So if you use a sampling strategy that favors shorter tokens or common phrases, you may get shorter answers. And fourth, the model size. The size of the GPT-2 model can also play a role. Smaller models may have limitations in generating diverse and detailed responses compared to larger models. So in this case, I'm using a very small model, and that is probably what's happening in this instance, along with a mix of the other things. But I think the model size is the primary driver as to why I'm getting the response that I am. So what am I going to do from this point moving forward? One of my classmates asked me if I had taken a look at a website called olama.com, and I hadn't heard of that until then. So I did do a little bit of research afterwards. One of the models that I'm very interested in using is the Llama 2 Uncensored. A lot of the models that are out there tend to have a lot of guardrails and some biases in how they present their responses and data. I'm interested in looking at it from a blank slate standpoint and feed it data sets so that it doesn't have any biases. Seeing how a lot of the models out there have biases, it would be very interesting to contrast the two between what has no bias and what does have bias, or at least a perceived bias, and compare the two. There's another one called Code Gemma. I believe it's either Code Gemma or Code Gemma. And this is a collection of powerful, lightweight models that can perform a variety of coding tasks, like fill in the middle of code completion, code generation, natural language understanding, and mathematical reasoning and instruction following. So since I do quite a bit of coding here, it'd be very interesting to have something that can help with code generation. There's another one similar to that called Code Llama. DeepSeek Coder is another one. And there's a couple others, OpenChat. It's like I'm looking for the functionality of GPT and, say, the Replica app, and maybe the functionality of, say, Raza chatbot, so that there's a few different multiple aspects of multiple code. But I mean, that's kind of the final version of this. I'm going to be tackling each one of these one at a time, but eventually I'd like to see if there's a way that I can combine these into something that has a more well-rounded capability, so that having the ability to hold a conversation while at the same time having functionality for generating code and doing some mathematical processing. So especially if it can do the processing mathematically and explain what it's doing, kind of like how GPT-2 or GPT-3, OpenAI's GPT, can explain things. I'd like to do this on a local level. And part of that is because of the nature of my employer. I'd like to pitch this at some point so that we would have the ability to have a local version of GPT that that none of the data that we are working on can leave our facility, that it's all handled on a local server. So, and that's because of security concerns. Anyway, that's what I've been working on since the last video. If you have any questions or comments, leave a comment or question below and hit the like button, and I will see you all next time.